Hi, everyone. Imagine doing the math and realizing it's impossible. You haven't touched your wife in 6 months, ever since the funeral of your best friend. But today, she tells you she's 3 months pregnant. That is exactly where Michael finds himself. He thought his marriage was a fortress, built to withstand anything. But a simple DNA test is about to reveal a secret that goes deeper than just an affair. It's a story about a betrayal that hurts, but a truth that hurts even more. If stories about complex human emotions and the gray areas of love speak to you, please hit subscribe and stay with me. This one is going to be an emotional roller coaster. Let's step into Michael's world.
The envelope from the paternity clinic felt heavier than paper had any right to be. It felt like holding a grenade with the pin already pulled. Michael sat in his car, the relentless Seattle rain blurring the windshield, turning the city lights into weeping streaks of gray and gold, knowing that the words inside would either save his marriage or desecrate the memory of the only two people he had ever loved. He didn't want to open it, because as long as it remained sealed, there was still a 0.1% chance that his wife wasn't a liar and his dead best friend wasn't a traitor. But silence, he was learning, was the loudest lie of all. If you are drawn to stories where the secrets of the heart are as deep and dark as the ocean, stay with me. This isn't just a story about cheating. It's about the ghosts we carry and the truths we try to bury. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made everything heavier. Michael Sullivan sat in his corner office at Wright Architecture, though panoramic glass offering a view of a gray, weeping skyline. On his desk, amidst blueprints for a new sustainable high-rise in Bellevue, sat a small, cream-colored envelope. It was from the Helix Paternity Center. It had been sitting there for 3 hours. Michael stared at it, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his coffee, which had gone cold long ago. He was a man of geometry, of load-bearing walls and calculated risks. If a beam was off by a fraction, the building fell. It was simple physics, but the math of his marriage had stopped making sense 3 days ago. "I'm pregnant, Michael." Genevieve had said it over dinner, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and terror. She had reached across the table, her fingers grazing his, looking for a spark, a smile, a miracle. But Michael hadn't smiled. He had done the calculation. He hadn't touched his wife in 6 months. Not since the police knocked on their door at 3:00 a.m. to tell them Chase's Porsche had gone over the guardrail on I-5. The grief had been a physical weight, pressing down on Michael's libido, turning his bed into a place of sleeping, not loving. 6 months. The pregnancy was 3 months along. Michael picked up the letter opener, the steel cold against his skin. He sliced the envelope open with a surgical precision that terrified him. He didn't want to be right. God, he would give anything to be the crazy, jealous husband. He would give anything for this to be an immaculate conception, a medical anomaly. He pulled the tri-folded paper out. Subject: prenatal paternity test results alleged father 1. Michael Sullivan probability of paternity 0.0%. The air left the room. It was as if the glass walls had shattered, sucking all the oxygen out into the wet Seattle afternoon. He read the next line. He had insisted on testing against a secondary sample, a sample he had retrieved from the hairbrush in the guest bathroom, the bathroom Chase used to use when he crashed over. Chaku. Bathroom Genevieve hadn't cleaned in 6 months because she said it felt wrong to erase him. Alleged father 2, Chase Rivers, deceased, probability of paternity 99.9%. Michael didn't scream. He didn't throw the paperweight through the window. He simply sat there, staring at the name. Chase, his best friend. The man who had stood beside him at the altar 7 years ago. The man who had toasted to their eternal happiness. The man Michael had cried for every single day for the last half-year. A laugh bubbled up in Michael's throat, a dry, jagged sound that sounded like glass grinding together. It was a joke. It had to be. Chase was dead. Chase was the loyal one. Chase was the brother he never had. And Genevieve? The woman who held him while he sobbed into her shoulder after the funeral? Michael stood up, grabbing his coat. He didn't feel the floor beneath his feet. He felt like he was floating in a void, untethered. He walked out of his office, past his assistant who tried to ask about the meeting at 4. "Cancel it," Michael said, his voice sounding like it was coming from a radio in another room. "I have to go home. I have to ask my wife why she's carrying a ghost." As Michael drove through the blinded streets of Seattle, the rhythmic thwack hiss of the windshield wipers acted like a metronome, counting down the moments until he had to face Genevieve. But his mind didn't stay in the car. The rhythm pulled him backward, dragging him out of the cold rain and into the warm, amber glow of memory. 8 months ago. The Sapphire Lounge. It was the kind of night that felt golden, the type you frame in your memory as the good old days, before you even realize they are over. They were seated at their usual corner booth, Michael, Genevieve, and Chase, the 3 musketeers of the Pacific Northwest. Chase Rivers was holding court, as he always did. He was telling a story about a client who wanted a house built entirely out of recycled shipping containers on a cliffside, mimicking the client's pretentious accent with perfect comedic timing. Michael was laughing so hard his ribs ached. He looked across the table at his best friend. Chase was handsome in that effortless, careless way. Hair slightly too long, shirt unbuttoned, one down too many. A magnetism that drew the attention of every woman in the room. But Genevieve wasn't laughing. Michael remembered that now. In the car, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, he replayed the scene. While he had been doubled over in mirth, Genevieve had been watching Chase's hands. Chase reached for his scotch, an aged single malt he swore was the nectar of gods. As his fingers curled around the crystal tumbler, there was a tremor. A sharp, violent shudder that caused the heavy glass to rattle against the table. Amber liquid sloshed over the rim, staining the white tablecloth. The laughter died instantly. "Whoa, easy there, Shaky," Michael teased, grabbing a napkin to dab so the spill. "Maybe switch to water? That's your third." Chase stared at his own hand as if it belonged to a stranger. For a split second, the charismatic mask slipped. His eyes went wide, filled with a raw, primal panic that Michael had never seen before. It was the look of a man standing on a trapdoor. "Yeah," Chase murmured, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Must be the caffeine. Too many late nights at the firm." "You work too hard," Michael said, clapping him on the back. "You need a vacation, buddy." "A permanent one, maybe," Chase joked darkly. Across the table, Genevieve hadn't moved. She wasn't looking at the spill. She was looking directly into Chase's eyes. The air between them suddenly felt thick, charged with a static electricity that Michael couldn't interpret. It wasn't sexual. At least he hadn't thought so at the time. It was terrified. "Chase," Genevieve said. Her voice was low, stripping away the ambient noise of the jazz bar. "Did you go to the appointment?" Michael looked between them, confused. "Appointment? What appointment? You okay, man?" Chase shot Genevieve a warning look, sharp and desperate. Dentist, Chase lied smoothly, turning his charm back toward Michael. Jen thinks I grind my teeth. She's obsessed with my dental hygiene. I am not, Genevieve snapped, but her voice lacked its usual playful bite. She looked pale. I'm just saying, you promised you'd take care of it. And I will, Chase said, softy. He reached out and covered Genevieve's hand with his own. Michael watched the gesture. At the time, he saw affection. He saw his best friend comforting his wife, a testament to how close they all were. He felt a swell of pride that the two people he loved most in the world loved each other too. Now, remembering the weight of Chase's hand on hers, Michael felt bile rise in his throat. I'm fine, Jen, Chase whispered. Really, don't ruin the night. Genevieve pulled her hand away slowly, her eyes glistening. She looked at Michael, and for a moment, she looked like she was about to speak, to shatter the illusion right there in the booth. But then she looked back at Chase, saw the pleading in his face, and swallowed her words. Okay, she whispered. Okay. The waiter arrived with a fresh round. Chase raised his glass, his hand steady now through sheer force of will. To us, Chase said, his voice rich and warm. To the family we choose. To us, Michael had echoed, clinking his glass against theirs. He remembered the sound of the crystal ringing out, a pure, clear note. He hadn't known then that it was the sound of a bell tolling. He hadn't realized that the us Chase was toasting to was a shrinking circle, one that was already leaving Michael on the outside.
Hold on. Let me pause here for a moment. This is heartbreaking because Michael thinks he's the main character in his life. But he's actually the outsider. Did you notice the foreshadowing? Chase's shaking hands, Genevieve's worried eyes. Michael thought they were hiding a romance, but they were actually hiding a tragedy he couldn't see. It makes you wonder, how much of our loved one's pain do we miss simply because we aren't looking closely enough?
3 days before the envelope arrived at his office, Michael was already living with a ghost. The silence in their apartment at the Meridian was not peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm breaks. Since Genevieve's announcement, Michael had moved into the guest bedroom. It was a passive-aggressive retreat that he didn't have the energy to disguise. He told her he needed space to process the miracle, but in truth, he couldn't bear to lie next to her and wonder whose face she was seeing when she closed her eyes. The guest room had effectively become Chase's room over the years. It was where Chase crashed after late nights at the firm, or when his own loneliness became too loud to bear in his bachelor pad. The room still smelled faintly of him, a mix of expensive cedar cologne and stale tobacco, despite the maid's best efforts. It was 2 a.m. The rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the city lights of Seattle into a blurred watercolor mess. Michael couldn't sleep. The math was eating him alive. 6 months. 3 months pregnant. Impossible. He sat up, the sheets tangling around his legs, and switched on the bedside lamp. The room was sparse, but there were remnants of Chase everywhere. A forgotten phone charger. A stack of Architectural Digest magazines on the nightstand. Michael stood up and walked over to the vintage bookshelf in the corner. Chase had been an audiophile, a man who swore that digital music had no soul. He had left a small stack of vinyl records here the last time he stayed over, promising to take them back next time. There was no next time. Michael flipped through the covers, his fingers numb. Coltrane, Davis, Fitzgerald. He stopped at a worn copy of Bill Evans' Waltz for Debbie. It was Chase's favorite. Michael remembered the night Chase had brought it over. ranting about the piano chords, about the sorrow in the keys. Michael pulled the record out of the sleeve. Something white fluttered to the floor. It was a piece of stationery, heavy stock, cream-colored. Right architecture letterhead. Michael bent down and picked it up. It wasn't a formal letter, it was a scrawl written in Chase's chaotic, sloping handwriting. For when the silence is too loud. Listen to track 4. It reminds me of how you look when it rains. There was no name, just the note tucked inside a record that had been left in Michael's house. Michael felt a cold flush spread across his chest. How you look when it rains. He thought of Genevieve. He thought of how she would stand by the window on rainy days, arms crossed, staring out at the gray world with a melancholy that Michael had always found beautiful, if impenetrable. He wasn't crazy. The math wasn't a mistake. The distance, the glances, the grief that seemed to swallow her whole. It wasn't just for a friend. Michael placed the note on the dresser. His hands were shaking, but his mind was suddenly crystalline, sharp, and dangerous. He walked into the ensuite bathroom attached to the guest room. It had been 6 months, but Genevieve hadn't touched this bathroom. She said she wanted to keep it ready for guests, but they hadn't had a single guest since the funeral. Michael opened the medicine cabinet. Empty. He looked down at the marble counter. In a ceramic cup, sitting gathering dust, was a tortoiseshell hairbrush. Chase had thick, unruly hair and always kept a brush here. Michael picked it up. It was woven with strands of dark hair. He looked at his own reflection in the mirror. He looked tired, aged 10 years and 6 months. He looked like a man about to detonate his own life. "I'm sorry, Chase," he whispered to the empty room. "But I have to know." He took a Ziploc bag from his pocket. He had brought it from the kitchen, a premeditated act he had been too cowardly to commit until he found the note. He pulled the hair from the bristles, sealed the bag, and put it in his pocket. The room felt colder now. The ghost wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a suspect, and Michael was no longer a grieving friend. He was a prosecutor building a case against the dead. The calendar on the wall marked the date, November the 12th. Michael was in Chicago for a conference on urban sustainability, leaving Genevieve alone in the sprawling silence of the penthouse. Outside, a bomb cyclone was battering the Pacific Northwest. The wind howling against the reinforced glass of the meridian like a trapped animal trying to get in. Genevieve was curled on the sofa, a book unread in her lap, when the buzzer rang. It was late, past 11. She checked the monitor. It was Chase. When she opened the door, she barely recognized him. The charismatic architect who usually strode into rooms as if he owned the building was gone. In his place stood a man soaked to the bone, shivering violently, his skin the color of wet ash. "Chase?" She pulled him inside, the wind tearing the door from her grip before she slammed it shut. "My God, you're freezing. Where's your coat?" He didn't answer. He just stood in the entryway, water pooling around his boots, staring at her with eyes that looked hollowed out. "I couldn't be alone," he whispered. His voice was cracked, stripped of its usual melodic baritone. "Mike's away. I didn't know where else to go." Genevieve went into overdrive. She guided him to the living room, sat him in front of the gas fireplace, and poured him a heavy glass of Cabernet. She wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, her maternal instincts flaring. He was trembling, not just from the cold, but from something internal, something vibrating in his very marrow. "Talk to me," she commanded gently, kneeling before him. "Is it work? Is it a girl?" Chase laughed, a wet, rattling sound. He took a long swallow of the wine. his hands shaking so badly he had to use both to hold the glass. "I went to the doctor again today, Jenny." The room went silent. The fire popped, a sharp retort in the quiet. Genevieve felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She knew he had been seeing specialists. He told her it was for migraines, for stress. "And?" she asked, barely breathing. Chase looked at the fire, refusing to meet her eyes. "It's not migraines. It's glioblastoma. Aggressive, inoperable." Genevieve felt the floor tilt. The words didn't make sense. Chase was 32. Chase was infinite. Chase was the future. "No," she said, shaking her head. "That's wrong. Get a second opinion." "I've had 3, he said, finally looking at her. Tears were streaming down his face, mixing with the rainwater. "I have 6 months, Jen. Maybe less. And the end? The doctor said the end will be ugly. I'm going to lose my mind before I lose my body." Genevieve let out a sob, covering her mouth. She reached for him, and he collapsed into her, burying his face in her neck. He smelled of rain and terror. "You have to tell Michael," she wept into his wet hair. "We'll fight this. We'll go anywhere. Switzerland, Tokyo." "No." Chase pulled back, gripping her shoulders. His eyes were wild. "You can't tell him. Promise me, Jen. He loves me too much. If he knows, he'll stop living. He'll spend the next 6 months watching me rot, treating me like a patient. I want to be his best friend until the lights go out, not his burden." "I can't keep that secret," she pleaded. "Please," he begged, his forehead resting against hers. "Let me be a man for a little longer." They sat there for hours as the storm raged, drinking the bottle of wine, crying until they were dehydrated. The grief was a physical thing, a third person in the room. As the night wore on, the terror of the void opening up beneath Chase seemed to consume them both. He was dying. The realization made every second feel excruciatingly precious. When he looked at her, his eyes searching for some anchor in the storm, the lines blurred. He didn't want to die. He wanted to feel something other than fear. He wanted to feel alive, just for one moment. "I'm scared, Jen," he whispered, his hand trembling on her cheek. "I don't want to be alone in the dark." She shouldn't have leaned in, she knew that, but the grief had hollowed her out too. She wanted to take the pain away, to offer comfort in the only language that seemed loud enough to drown out death. When their lips met, it wasn't passionate, it was desperate. It was a collision of two people trying to prove they still existed. The rain battered the glass, drowning out the sound of their betrayal, hiding the tragedy that was unfolding on the rug before the fire. They clung to each other like drowning sailors, unaware that in trying to save each other from the dark, they were sinking the ship. The elevator ride down from the 40th floor of the Sterling building took less than a minute. But to Michael, it felt like a descent into the crushing depths of the ocean. The numbers above the door ticked down, 30, 20, 10, counting away the life he thought he had. When the doors slid open to the parking garage, the air was damp and smelled of gasoline and wet concrete. He walked to his car, a black sedan parked in its reserved spot. His movements were mechanical, a marionette guided by a severing string. He unlocked the door, slid into the leather driver's seat, and closed the world out. For a moment, there was just silence, the kind of silence that rings in your ears after a gunshot. Then, the physical reality hit him. Michael lurched forward, clutching the steering wheel as his stomach revolted. He dry-heaved violently, his body trying to expel the toxicity of the information he had just absorbed. There was nothing to bring up but bile and bitter coffee. He gasped for air, his forehead resting against the cool leather of the wheel, sweat beading on his hairline despite the chill. Chase. He looked at the empty passenger seat. He could almost see him there, reclining with that easy, arrogant grace, feet up on the dashboard despite Michael's constant protests. He could hear Chase's laugh, that rich, infectious sound that used to pull Michael out of his darkest moods. It was all a lie. Every memory from the last 6 months, the shared meals, the comforting touches, the tears Genevieve had shed at the funeral, suddenly warped. They hadn't been grieving with him. They had been grieving around him. He had been the audience to their private tragedy, the oblivious husband playing the role of the fool while they lived out some doomed romance right under his nose. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumbled paper again. He smoothed it out against the steering wheel. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. The rage didn't come as a fire. It came as a glacier. It started at his fingertips and froze his veins, turning the chaos in his chest into a solid, unmoving block of ice. If Chase were alive, Michael might have killed him. But Chase was dead. He had escaped judgment. He had left Michael to clean up the wreckage, to raise the child, to look into the eyes of a baby that would grow up looking exactly like the man who betrayed him. Michael started the car. The engine purred to life, a stark contrast to the violence in his mind. He drove out of the garage and into the Seattle drizzle. The city was waking up to the evening rush hour. Red taillights stretched out in front of him like a river of blood. He drove with terrifying precision, obeying every traffic law, signaling every turn. He was a man holding onto the edges of his sanity by focusing on the rules of the road. As he turned onto the street leading to the Meridian, he looked up at the penthouse. The lights were on. Warm, yellow light spilling out into the gray dusk. It looked like a home. It looked like a sanctuary. Michael pulled into the driveway. He killed the engine and sat there for a long time, watching the rain streak the windshield. He thought about the jazz record he had smashed in his mind 1,000 times. He thought about the baby growing inside his wife. He wasn't going up there to scream. Screaming was for people who still had hope that things could be fixed. He was going up there to deliver a eulogy for his marriage. He opened the car door and stepped out into the rain, not bothering with an umbrella. The water soaked his suit instantly, but he didn't feel it. He walked to the lobby doors, his footsteps echoing on the pavement, steady and heavy, like the approach of an executioner.
I had to pause because this hit different. For Michael, Chase didn't just die in that car crash. He died today, right when that DNA result came back. The man he idolized is gone, replaced by a liar. And honestly, Michael's reaction is terrifying. No screaming, just cold, logical silence. That is the sound of a man shutting down his heart to survive. If you were Michael, would you explode in rage, or would you go completely cold like him?
The sound of the key turning in the lock was loud enough to sever the tension in the room, but not the dread. When Michael walked into the penthouse, the air smelled of roasted garlic and rosemary. Genevieve was in the kitchen, wearing a soft cashmere cardigan, stirring something on the stove. It was a domestic tableau so perfect it made Michael's teeth ache. She turned when she heard the door, a tentative, hopeful smile touching her lips, a smile that died the instant she saw his eyes. Michael didn't speak. He didn't take off his wet coat. He walked past the foyer table, past the framed wedding photo where a laughing Chase stood between them with a champagne glass raised high, and straight to the marble kitchen island. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled Helix report. He didn't slam it down. He placed it gently on the counter and slid it across the cold stone until it rested next to the cutting board. "Michael?" Her voice was a whisper, trembling like a leaf in a gale. "Read it," he said. His voice was unrecognizable, flat, dead, devoid of any timbre of humanity. Genevieve wiped her hands on a towel, her movements slow, as if moving through water. She looked down at the paper. She didn't need to pick it up. The bold text was visible from where she stood. Chase Rivers. She didn't gasp. She didn't scream. She simply closed her eyes, and her body seemed to fold in on itself. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white, as the air left her lungs in a long, shuddering exhale. "I can explain," she choked out, tears spilling over her lashes instantly. "Michael, please. It's not what you think. It wasn't. We didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to?" Michael laughed, a dry, terrifying sound. "Did you trip? Did you fall onto him? Or did you just decide that my best friend was a better option than your husband?" "He was dying," she cried out, the words tearing from her throat. "He was terrified, Michael. That night, the storm. He told me everything. He was so scared of the dark. He just wanted to feel alive. We were both so sad." Michael stared at her. The words registered, dying, but they didn't penetrate the armor of his rage. All he heard was justification. All he saw was the image of them together, in this house. Perhaps on this very counter, while he was away working to build a future for them. "So it was pity?" Michael asked, his voice dripping with acid. "You slept with my best friend out of pity? That makes it worse, Genevieve. That makes it pathetic." "It was love," she shouted back, and then immediately covered her mouth, realizing the error. The silence that followed was absolute. Michael nodded slowly. "Right, thank you. That's all I needed to hear." He turned and walked into the living room. He went straight to the vintage turntable cabinet. The copy of Waltz for Debbie was sitting there, the sleeve facing out, the soundtrack to their betrayal, the ghost in the machine. "Michael, don't!" Genevieve pleaded, running after him. He grabbed the vinyl record. He didn't pull it out of the sleeve. He took the whole thing in both hands and snapped it over his knee. The sound of the vinyl shattering was sharp and final, like a bone breaking. He threw the shards onto the Persian rug. "He's dead, Genevieve," Michael said, looking at the broken black plastic. "But you're still here, and I can't look at you without seeing him." He walked past her, brushing her shoulder as if she were a stranger on a subway. He went to the bedroom, grabbed a duffel bag, and threw in 3 shirts, a pair of jeans, and his shaving kit. He didn't pack anything else. He didn't need anything else. When he came back out, Genevieve was on her knees on the living room floor, trying to piece together the broken record, sobbing uncontrollably. She looked small, defeated, and devastatingly beautiful in her grief. Michael paused at the door. He wanted to scream. He wanted to hold her. He did neither. "Don't call me," he said. "I'll have my lawyer send the paperwork." He opened the door and walked out, leaving his wife alone with the ghost of his best friend and the child that would bind them all together forever. The Archer Hotel was a sanctuary of impersonal luxury. The room smelled of lavender sanitizer and stale air conditioning, a stark contrast to the warmth of the home Michael had just abandoned. He sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, a bottle of bourbon on the nightstand, staring at the muted TV. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shattered vinyl record on the Persian rug. A sharp knock at the door broke the stupor. Michael ignored it. He didn't. Want to see Genevieve. He didn't want to hear apologies. The knock came again, louder, more insistent. Michael, open the damn door. It's Rachel. Rachel Green, Genevieve's assistant, but more importantly, Chase's cousin. The only other person who carried the same blood as the ghost haunting Michael's life. Michael dragged himself up and opened the door. Rachel stood there, wet from the relentless Seattle drizzle, clutching a thick manila envelope against her chest. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her jaw was set in stone. You look like hell, she said, pushing past him into the room without an invitation. I'm not in the mood for a lecture, Rachel, Michael muttered, leaving the door open. If she sent you, she didn't send me, Rachel snapped, turning to face him. She doesn't even know I'm here. She's too busy throwing up from stress and worrying about the baby. Michael flinched at the word. Baby. Rachel took a breath, her anger softening into something more fragile. I know about the DNA test, Michael. Jen told me. But there is something you don't know. Something nobody knew except me and him. She held out the envelope. On the front, in that familiar, sloping scrawl, was a single name. Mikey. Michael stared at it. What is this? He gave it to me 4 months before the accident, Rachel said, her voice trembling. He made me promise to mail it to you only after he died. But then, the car crash happened so fast, and everyone was so broken. I didn't know if I should still give it to you. But now you need to read it. Michael took the envelope. It felt heavy. He sat back down on the bed, his hands shaking as he tore the seal. Inside was a stack of handwritten pages. November 15th, 2 days after the storm. Mikey, the letter began. If you're reading this, then the doctors were right, and the clock finally ran out. I hope it wasn't messy. I hope I went out with some dignity. Maybe in my sleep, though knowing me, I probably tripped over a rug. Michael felt a lump form in his throat. It sounded exactly like him. I'm writing this because I'm a coward. I couldn't tell you to your face. I have glioblastoma, stage 4. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. But for the last 6 months, I've been slowly disappearing. I didn't tell you because I know you, man. You're a fixer. You would have spent every last second trying to save me, researching trials, dragging me to specialists. I didn't want our last months to be about sickness. I wanted them to be about us. Michael wiped his eyes, a tear smearing the ink on the page. But I messed up, Mike. God, I messed up. That night, the night of the storm, I went to your place because I was terrified. I could feel my mind slipping. Genevieve, she was just trying to keep me from drowning. We didn't do it because we didn't love you. We did it because for 10 minutes I wasn't dying, and she wasn't watching her husband's best friend rot. It was grief, Mike. It was a funeral for the living. Michael read the lines over and over. A funeral for the living. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I betrayed the best man I've ever known. But please don't hate her. She carries the weight of my secret, and now she carries the guilt of my sin. If there is anything left of me in this world, take care of it. Don't let my mistake destroy the beautiful thing you two built. Michael let the pages fall to the floor. The rage that had sustained him for the last 24 hours cracked, splintering under the weight of the truth. Chase hadn't been laughing at him. Chase had been dying, terrified and alone, trying to protect Michael from the pain until the very end. He was going to die anyway, Rachel whispered from the doorway. The accident, the toxicology report said he had high levels of pain meds. We think maybe he drove off the road on purpose. before the tumor took his mind. Michael put his head in his hands and wept. He wept for the betrayal, yes. But mostly he wept for the silence he had mistaken for peace, the silence that had hidden a tragedy so deep it had drowned them all. Lakeview Cemetery sat on the crest of Capitol Hill, a sprawling garden of stone and silence overlooking the gray expanse of Lake Washington. The rain had softened to a persistent, misty drizzle, the kind that soaked through wool coats and chilled the marrow. Michael parked his car at the bottom of the hill. He didn't need directions to the plot. He had visited it every Sunday for 6 months, usually alone, usually talking to the granite headstone as if it were a confessional. Today, he wasn't alone. From 50 yards away, he saw her. Genevieve was a silhouette against the weeping sky, dressed in black, standing perfectly still in front of the fresh earth. She wasn't holding an umbrella. She was letting the rain fall on her hair plastered to her cheeks, looking like a statue of penance carved from the storm itself. Michael walked up the path, the wet grass muffling his footsteps. In his hand, he carried a bouquet of white lilies, Chase's favorite, ironically enough. Chase used to joke that red roses were for guilt, but white lilies were for the truth. He stopped a few feet behind her. She didn't turn around, but her shoulders tensed. She knew he was there. After 7 years of marriage, they had developed a radar for each other's presence, a frequency that even betrayal hadn't fully jammed. Michael stepped forward and opened his large black umbrella. He held it over her, shielding her from the rain. Genevieve flinched at the sudden reprieve from the cold water. She turned slowly, her eyes swollen, her mascara running in dark streaks down her pale face. She looked at Michael, then at the umbrella, and finally at the lilies in his hand. "You read it," she whispered. It wasn't a question. "I read it," Michael said. His voice was hoarse, stripped of the anger that had fueled him for the last 2 days. All that was left was a deep, aching exhaustion. He looked past her at the headstone. Chase Alexander Rivers, beloved friend, 1992-2025. "He drove off the road, Jen," Michael said softly. "It wasn't an accident. He knew what was coming, the seizures, the loss of self. He chose the exit." Genevieve let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hand. "He was so scared, Michael. That night, he didn't want to die. He just wanted to be held by the people who loved him." Michael stepped closer to the grave. He knelt down and placed the lilies on the wet stone, right next to a small, waterlogged picture of the 3 of them that Genevieve must have left earlier. He traced the letters of his best friend's name. He hated him. He loved him. He missed him so much it felt like a physical amputation. "I can't forgive him yet," Michael said, standing up and looking at his wife. "And I don't know if I can forgive you. Not today." Genevieve nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "I know. I don't expect you to." "But," Michael continued, his gaze dropping to her stomach. Her coat was buttoned tight, concealing the small bump that was beginning to form. "I read the math. 99.9%. It's his," she choked out. Michael looked at the gray horizon. He thought about the empty apartment. He thought about the silence. If he walked away now, he would be pure. He would be the righteous victim, but he would also be alone. And the last piece of Chase, the only piece of his brother that had survived the crash, would be raised by strangers, or raised in a broken home without a father. Chase had left him a mess, but he had also left him a miracle. Michael reached out. His hand trembled as he touched Genevieve's cheek, wiping away a streak of rain and tears. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, desperate for the contact she thought she had lost forever. "He took everything from us," Michael whispered, his thumb brushing her skin. "But he left something back." He moved his hand down, resting it tentatively on her stomach. He felt the warmth through the wet wool. Beneath his palm was a heart that beat with the same blood as the man lying 6 feet under the ground. "I can't do this for him," Michael said, his voice firming up. "And I can't do it for you. But I can do it for the child. Because that baby didn't ask to be the price of a secret." Genevieve covered his hand with hers, pressing it tighter against her body. "He left you a part of himself, Michael," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I just happened to be the vessel." Michael looked at the grave one last time. The rain was picking up again, drumming a rhythm on the granite. It sounded like jazz. It sounded like the final track on a broken record. "Come on," Michael said, turning her gently toward the car. "Let's go home. We have a lot to talk about." They walked down the hill together, sharing the umbrella, leaving the dead to sleep in the rain, while the living went back to the messy, painful, beautiful business of survival.
Wow, what a heavy, beautiful ending. This story reminds us that sometimes the people we love are flawed, and forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about finding a way to move forward with the pieces we have left. Michael chose to honor the legacy, even though the memory was tainted. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you were in Michael's shoes, could you raise that child as your own? Let me know in the comments below. If this story touched you, please leave a like and share it with someone. Thank you for watching, and take care of your heart. I'll see you in the next one.